John Scott here with Jonathan Acosta. The NFL trade deadline coming and going with no deals made by Brandon Beane and the Bills. Boy, was social media unhappy with that inactivity. We heard Beane give some explanations why. I'll just start with your personal opinion on the Bills not getting a trade done.
I really expected them to make some sort of move at the deadline, and it sounded like Brandon Beane really expected it too. He said that he would have lost money in Vegas on the Bills not making a move at the deadline. Ultimately, I think a lot of his message came down to it takes two to tango, it takes two teams willing to make a deal, and he was not willing to put this team in a compromising position just for the sake of placating fans by making a deal. He also mentioned teams within the division, because we saw Miami and the Jets as two of the teams selling at the deadline. Obviously, they're going to be less willing to sell to teams within the division that might be buyers like the Patriots and or the Bills. So I think this was one of those situations where there was a lot of multiple factors playing into them not wanting to make a deal. And he said, listen, he went home just as mad as fans on Tuesday night at the fact of them not being able to make a deal, but he also believes in the roster that they have going forward.
People are upset that nothing was done while just simply not wanting to accept the reality of the situation. It does take two, and as Beane said, the list of names out there in the social media world reportedly that were available was this big. This many of them ultimately got traded. The idea of the A.J. Browns or the Brian Thomas or even Calais Campbell or Harrison Phillips or on and on we go, those guys did not get traded. And if they were so readily available that you could just throw anything out there and get them, all these other teams in the NFL would have done the exact same thing. If you could get Brian Thomas for a first-round pick, the Bills would have done it. That's what they would have done. It just wasn't possible. That's where I take some issue of people just being like, he wasn't even trying, he was trying, but you're also just not going to give Ricky Williams type deal and trade your draft away.
And that was one of the main points he made. Was he said 99% of players are out there are available for some sort of price. But what is the price you're willing to give up? You know, maybe a guy is generally worth a second-round pick, right? Are you willing to offer a team a first-round pick just to push through that sort of trade when you know you might be overpaying for said player? And Beane also said, listen, this team is 6-2. It's a team that made the AFC Championship game last year. They're going, and Sean McDermott touched on this also, yes, they have injuries. They're going to need young players to step up. But you've been starting to see some of the glimpses of those young players step up. Cole Bishop, maybe with his best game as a pro against Kansas City. Max Hairston with his first interception. Deion Walker's played well on the defensive line. They're going to be getting bodies back later on in the season, too, in terms of a TJ Sanders and a Daquan Jones. So this is a team that just because they didn't make a trade, not all hope is gone. Again, I personally thought that the team could use a trade, and I expected them to make one. But now that they didn't get one done, they have to move forward with what they have inside the building.
And Beane made it clear, TJ Sanders coming back or Daquan Jones or anyone who's injured coming back from that is not something that had him have pause in terms of trying to at least acquiring other guys to fill these holes. They acknowledge the holes that they have. They also certainly, now that we're moving past it, aren't going to come out here and say, well, I still don't believe in the wide receiver group, or I still don't believe in the pass rush or the defensive line and things like that. They're going to move forward here. Beane also adding, and this isn't going to make anyone happy, but you could still bring players on board. They're just not going to be at the same caliber. Jordan Phillips was the example he used just a year ago, a guy who had a sack in the AFC Championship game, who we know what he's doing even this season. Guys that are still available and potentially coming in here to fill some of the holes.
And guys who may already be inside the building but are on the roster, namely a Gabe Davis, right? The guy who's been practicing with the team and stuff like that. And I know there were maybe jokes on social media about, hey, Gabe Davis is going to be the big trade deadline acquisition, right? I mean, we've seen what Gabe Davis can do for this team when he's healthy in the past. Is he the same Gabe Davis as he was in 2023? Well, we're going to find out once he finally gets on the field. But that's certainly a guy who brings a skill set that is not redundant with a Curtis Samuel or a Khalil Shakir or Elijah Moore. It's something a little bit different, right? Maybe more similar to what a Keon Coleman is or whatever. So maybe he's a guy that comes in and gives this offense not a number one alpha receiver, but just a presence that it can use within the context of the entire offense.
Yeah, none of the guys acquired yesterday, realistically, were going to move the needle greatly. If you were in Vegas and said, this is what the Bills Super Bowl odds were on Monday, this is what the Bills Super Bowl odds would be on Tuesday, should it be Rashid Shaheed or Jacoby Myers or on and on and on, they're not making it drastically different. And that's also part of the equation here of, am I going to pay the 2 or the extra draft pick or the extra round above just to get a guy that's going to fit in, make an impact, but not drastically change things?
I think Rashid Shaheed, this is where we'll differ in opinion, and that's okay. I think Rashid Shaheed was the move that was made out of the ones that were made yesterday, where I'm like, I feel like the Bills could have done that, would have brought something to this offense, would have elevated the team. But at the same time, I felt like the bigger need for this team going into the trade deadline was on defense. And you didn't see any of those big name defensive linemen get moved other than Quinnen Williams. But the Jets are not going to sell him to the Bills, even if the Bills did offer him a first-round pick. Teams are not in the business, unless you're the Browns, of helping out teams within your division, right? That just doesn't happen. You don't see that happen. And I don't think the Bills were really going to be offering a first-round pick. Even if they were, the Jets weren't going to take it. So he goes to the Cowboys. That was the only big-name defensive lineman that you saw move. And to your point of maybe with the receivers, are any of the guys going to come in and really change the dynamic of the defense? How many of those defensive linemen that were out there, maybe that were actually available, were going to help out the Bills defense, right? And again, you have a TJ Sanders coming back later on in the season. You're going to have Daquan Jones back. So Brandon Beane touched on this. They build a roster at the beginning of the season with the hope of not needing the trade deadline. Obviously, injuries can sort of dictate that fact. But I think Brandon Beane, if he really felt that much urgency to change the roster or else they didn't have a chance of winning the Super Bowl, I think he would have gone to that extra length of getting a deal done if that's where he felt like this team needed.
100%. So this is the reality. The Bills didn't make any changes. This is the roster that they have. But I think another side of this as we push forward, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane touching on different position groups and really identifying people are going to have to step up. And that's where you look at guys like they've inserted Jordan Hancock and Max Hairston as things that have stabilized, maybe make you feel a little more comfortable with safety and corner than you did 3 weeks ago coming into the bye week. Now, like there's Landon Jackson. The guy's played 2 games and he's a 3rd-round pick. They're not asking him to be the savior, but now this guy needs to actually elevate his play midway through the rookie season and at least get a game day roster spot and maybe play. The TJ Sanders, Jordan Phillips said after practice, when he gets back, you're going to see a new, mature, different version. He called Deion Walker the defensive rookie of the year in the league with how he's played. These types of guys are going to have to elevate, and certainly that's the Josh Palmers, the Keon Colemans, and everyone at the wide receiver group. They have to because they don't have a choice. There's no one else coming in. I
think the Landon Jackson one is fascinating because he's sort of the one where you kind of don't really know what you have in him yet. You haven't seen him that much on the field yet. And Sean McDermott said, listen, he's going to need to step up. He knows he's going to need to step up. And it was fascinating talking with him after practice, sort of asking him, like, what's sort of this journey that you've been on, right? Because when you're drafted in the 3rd round, you expect to play more than what you've played so far at this season. He said he's learned a lot about his mental toughness, and he's learned to lean on his family and his faith because it has been a trying time for him. But at the same time, he was honest when he said that, he looks at the injuries and he knows that there's a opportunity sort of coming open for him. The coaches have talked to him about staying ready for his moment and that he feels that moment is approaching considering, the Michael Hoyt injury that happened against Kansas City, right? And certainly he has the athletic traits to make that happen. A big thing we talk about with the rookies, though, is sort of their knowledge of the playbook and how that influences their ability to play fast once they're actually on the field. Obviously, this isn't training camp anymore. This isn't week 1. We're into the second half of the regular season, right? So now you hope that there's a little bit more of that sort of grasping of the playbook and stuff like that, and that now with being in the building, seeing guys perform within his own rookie class on that defensive line, and now seeing the opportunity that's in front of him, that now is the moment where he goes out and takes it and really starts to contribute to a team that is going to need him to contribute going forward.
A guy that's been with this team, a high draft pick, is Keon Coleman. Boy, have we litigated his play dating back to last year through the offseason and this year here. But he continues to be a focal point because he's just not producing as you need him to, frankly. Mm-hmm. There's different layers to this. We heard Sean McDermott once again address it of they like what they're seeing. He's mentioning 2-dimensional, which means we're talking about the run blocking, which I'm going to be completely honest. I know it's important. It matters. But you're not drafting Keon Coleman top of the 2nd round for his run blocking here. You're drafting him to get open and make plays at the wide receiver position, and he's not doing it still at this point.
I think, how do I say this? You get to a point where you just sort of accept things for how they are, right? And when someone shows you who they are, you just sort of accept that. And it's not to say that Keon Coleman can't be a great player, but we're now a year and a half into his career, right? And we haven't seen the signs of him being a consistent sort of number 1 alpha wide receiver. Have there been individual pockets of performance? Absolutely. You think back last year to Tennessee. You think to the Seattle game. You think this year to the fourth quarter of the Baltimore game, right? But those are more, at this point, isolated instances than a reflection of the total body of work, right? So I think at this point, you just have to sort of know what you have in Keon Coleman, at least for this year, and you progress forward with the offense. Anyways, it looks like the identity that they want to have on offense is a run-first identity, right? You have the three tight ends all doing their job blocking, maybe less so Dalton Kincaid, but certainly Jackson Haas and Dawson Knox. James Cook looking like one of the contenders for Offensive Player of the Year, right? So it looks like that's the identity that this team wants to have. And so that's also going to take away some of the opportunities from a Keon Coleman to go out there and have a 7-reception, 120-yard game with the touchdown, right? Brandon Beane mentioned it also, that when you're running the ball the way you have, you think back to the Carolina game, there's just going to be fewer opportunities in the passing game. And when you think about the passing game, frankly, there are just guys that are ahead of Keon Coleman right now in the pecking order. You think of Dalton Kincaid, you think of Khalil Shakir. So for the Bills to go out and target Keon Coleman 10 or 11 times in a game just wouldn't also make sense considering the other weapons that they have on offense.
Brandon Beane adding, when asked specifically about Coleman, let's just let this year play out. He still has half of that second season. Not everyone's development is linear. Cole Bishop may be a prime example. We saw him flying around and popping against Kansas City when a month ago we were thinking, my God, this guy is not the answer whatsoever. That doesn't mean Coleman's going to ascend here at the back half of the season, his second one. But they're not losing hope. They can't afford to at this point in time. I think we let it play out. The trade deadline's also going to force that with no new guys coming in here. And I think the real conversations for a second straight year about Keon Coleman and the wide receiver group as a whole will become serious once the year is over.
Well, I think one thing to just keep an eye on is Gabe Davis is eventually, I think, going to get a role on this team. That could give us a lens or a reflection, however you want to say it, of how this team sort of views that position, maybe views Keon Coleman going forward, right? If Gabe Davis just gets on the roster, but it's getting like one catch a game, one catch every 2 games, means that this team is maybe not viewing him as a real threat to what Keon Coleman can do for them on the outside. But if we get into a position where the way maybe Jordan Poyer has started off on the practice squad right now, he's playing meaningful snaps for this team. If we get into a position where Gabe Davis is eventually playing meaningful snaps for this team, getting meaningful targets from Josh Allen, then maybe I think we revisit the conversation of how this team views Keon Coleman, not just this year, but going forward.
Bills at the Dolphins shows you how much really there is to talk about that one this Sunday here. So back on the road, Miami shipping off Jalen Phillips, but the only guy that they really traded at the deadline here. They seem like they're going to be massive sellers, and like they said, it takes 2 to tango. We'll get into more of that as the week rolls along. With Jonathan Acosta, I'm John Scott for Channel 2 Sports.